Mark, it's like, imagine if you were supposed to deploy and then that. I mean, honestly, it's like the sign.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
Like, you're not going anywhere. Right? Yeah. That's gnarly.
Sorry to hear about that.
Yeah,
Seriously, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're
I
okay.
was just, what time? It was at nighttime.
According to the detective, it was somewhere around 4:30. So
And
when I was PM. So when I was going home
oh, okay.
Friday or Saturday?
Saturday.
You had to work Saturday?
Mm-hmm. It was drill weekend.
Oh my gosh.
And was there a kid with him? As he stated.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Good to know. I appreciate that.
No problem, Bob. I'm moving up in the world.
Yeah, I had to go 3 times.
Yeah.
And the first time, they were just going to let him.
Hey.
Wow.
He was already on a different sentence.
Oh, for another charge?
For a drug charge.
Oh wow.
And they were like, they were going to let go. And
Oh my God.
the advocate, or the
Surprise.
I was surprised.
prosecutor said, the victim's here.
Yeah.
And everybody was like,
Like full circle. Well, the theme of
Oh.
the
and then it went to
event.
the second
Full
time.
circle.
They,
And it's kind of
there, the defense attorney
Right.
had it postponed. So it's
It
really,
is. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
It's the
I will
definition
definitely.
of it.
Right?
So,
All right, everybody ready?
Yes.
All right. We'll go ahead and get started with the City Council work session for November 7, 2023. The first item on our agenda is the 2024 utility rates and impact fee recommendation, and we'll hear from staff.
Good evening, Mayor Clark, members of the City Council. Thank you, Jules. Do have a few slides to walk through both utility rates and impact fees or system development fees tonight. So the ones that impact our enterprise funds have been heard by Water and Sewer Board at their last meeting and did recommend those rates come to you for consideration. So we'll layer on the information that they looked at as well as the other impact fees as we go through it. And we'll just dive right in. So starting with our main water fund, looking first at potable rates. So the water treated, or the treated water that we get from Greeley. Historically, each year we look at both a base rate and a consumption rate for that potable water. We are currently working through the water rate study with FCS Group and don't have rate recommendations from them yet. So we anticipate hearing probably towards the end of this year for implementation early in next year, recommendations or implementing recommendations from that rate study. But internally, we didn't want to get further behind. So as we wait for those rates, we anticipate a change in structure, maybe a change in rates themselves. Didn't seem prudent to wait what could be an additional 6 months before we continue to move forward with the water rates, knowing that everything's on an increase. So what we're recommending tonight is continuing with a base rate increase consistent with what we've done in the last few years, which is an additional 75 cents per month per account. So we're currently at $22.50 for inside rates and $23.50 for outside. So recommending we add that 75 cents per month per account. That adds about an additional $50,000 for ongoing operations and maintenance of the water system. And then on the consumption side of potable water, we're also waiting for final confirmation from Greeley on what they expect their treated water rate increase. We're assuming an increase will be for next year. We've seen everything from 3% to 11%. We had a few years ago. We hope it'll be a more nominal increase for next year. What I would like to do is at least include a 3% increase into rates that would start in January 1. Again, all this will be communicated to FCS as they're putting final touches on a rate study. So if 3% either isn't enough or is too much, we'll get that fleshed out in the rate study as well. So we'll be able to adjust it, but we don't anticipate less than a 3% increase. So both of these feel prudent to continue to recommend for next year. What that means for average single-family potable water usage of about 9,200 gallons a month would be $1.60 per month increase in that water conservation or consumption amount, that is. And then as we move through these rates at the end, I have kind of a mock bill that'll show you what the monthly impact might be to an average resident. Moving on to non-potable water, recommending an inflationary rate increase of just over 8%, and that's the DOLA's Consumer Price Index inflationary rate for this area. So we know it's costing more for labor and equipment and supplies to provide that non-potable water to those users. So that's been our basis in years past, is to also apply that DOLA CPI index to that. An average non-potable water user with about 6,100 gallons of usage would see an increase of $1.37 per month during that non-potable season. On the ditch rate, we would like to increase it by that same inflationary little over 8%. So you can see in the rate table there, but for instance, less than an acre lot would go up $3.57. I will just mention, I know Justine is continuing to work on a plan for the ditch system, and I know we'll have more information this probably next year, probably not yet this year, but looking at true cost to operate the ditch and everything that goes into that. So if we're not able to incorporate that in the rate study itself, that's additional information that staff's working on that we'll talk about in the future. Moving on to wastewater rates, the structure is a little bit different because we did complete a rate study for the wastewater enterprise in 2021, and we were hopeful that study set our rates for the future years after that. It did for last year. We didn't have an increase in the rates. We were able to stay with what the rate study said, and unfortunately, inflation is higher than what we had initially included in 2021 when we completed that study. So what I'm recommending is a 5% increase to wastewater rates to kind of bridge that gap. If inflation's at 8, our study had about a 3% inflationary assumption in the rates that were already put into effect. I would hate to put the wastewater fund behind as well. I feel like we need to keep marching forward to keep up with ongoing costs to that enterprise as well. And so would like to recommend we add that 5% rate onto the wastewater rates. What you'll see there is for the base would go up from $40.52 per month for residential to $42.55, so $2.03 increase. We've applied the same percentage to the consumption after your 4,000 gallons that's included in your base rate. We're applying that 5% to the additional rates also. And even more different is our storm drainage enterprise. And what we had talked about last year was including a 15% rate increase to storm drainage to help also keep ahead of rising costs, keep some money in that fund when there are additional capital or maintenance needs, so that we had some cash to be able to handle the needs and the maintenance of that system. As costs are increasing higher, quicker than we're able to accumulate the money, I went back and looked at a 5-year plan of what 20% could get us rather than 15% that we talked about last year. That would mean about $2.33 for a residential lot. But what it means in terms of our storm drainage fund is finally starting to get ahead of those costs and accumulate some money so that we can pay for some of our capital improvements in-house without having to issue more debt. We know that another undertaking like we're currently doing on the east side storm drainage, if we're looking at another $8 million or $10 million, we would have to assume additional debt at that point. So what we're also doing is trying to get our rates to a point where they would be high enough to satisfy debt service payments. So we'll accumulate money until that happens, and then we'll be able to continue to receive that money to hopefully pay debt if we needed to issue additional debt in the future. Last user rate to talk about is our refuse and recycling. We do have a 5-year contract with Waste Management currently for those services. Spoke with them late last week, and they're still trying to dial in what their rate increases will be next year. But at the end of September, it was about 5.3%. He didn't think it would go higher than that. So I did just model a 5% increase onto Waste Management. And if you'll remember when we started this year's contract, what we have done in this fund is we charge 10% more than what Waste Management charges us. So that helps to pay for our cleanup weekends, not fully, but in part pay for that service. And then because we don't have our own landfill, we don't have our own trucks to service or that kind of infrastructure, any additional cost of cleanup weekends, for instance, would come from some of the fund balance in that fund. So we do have a couple $100,000 there that we can use for additional activities and events for the city for cleanup. So very small increase, relatively speaking, for refuse and recycling. We are still offering that trash and recycling bundle that will go up less than if you have these services individually, which I think is the goal of it. And as a side note for this, we're working hard with Waste Management to look at what we can do in the coming months to promote recycling usage. The participation rates are dropping, and it's not increasing, which is not what anybody wants. So we're going to be working on other ways to communicate and incentivize that program. So a sample bill, just an average single-family home, and I did this assuming that they don't have ditch water, and assuming that they're not having non-potable usage, just so we can get a better feel for what an average bill throughout the year would be. And so you can see there what they might be paying there for those average 9,200 gallon usage on both your water, which then is part of your wastewater usage now as well. You might be paying about $175. That would go up closer to $183, so about an $8.42 per month increase, which comes out to a 5% overall increase. My head was spinning as I was looking at 8% here and 5% here and 20% here, and needed to just know, what does this really mean? So 5% is what all that means for an average bill. But I'll pause here before we go on to some of the tap fees and impact fees. Are there questions or discussion around any of these rates or thoughts that I can answer?
I just wanted to confirm your feeling, because I was writing down all of the increases here, and at first I was appalled. And
You see your
anyways,
eyes.
and for it to be just around $9, excluding any non-pot, I think that unfortunately it's the way that we're gonna have to, just operate. So it's kind of good to be prepared for that.
I appreciate also, I know since we, kind of re-upped our contract with Waste Management, just kind of giving that information and letting us see into the reasons why we're, a specific margin is used. I think that's great. And I do like the fact that we have the cleanups, for our community, because everyone loves those. And I think they're needed in order for us to keep, the aesthetic of our city and allow our residents to have a place to take their stuff. So, thank you.
And on that note, I know we're trying to promote the recycling and everything like that. If I'm not mistaken, these actually rates are lower than they've been in the past.
Yes.
Even with the 5% increase, it's still lower than years past, because I remember us going out for bid and they came back with a much lower cost. So this is still saving taxpayer or, our residents a lot of money. Yeah.
Especially if you have a second.
Second, right.
Bin or recycle and bin, those rates were significantly higher. Yep, you're right.
So I think we need to figure out how to market that
Right.
and the root cause of why people are not using a recyclable. I guess, my reason is probably a little bit more complex than other people's, but I've been down to the waste management recycling plant
Oh,
and
I
have
remember
learned
that.
how much of it is not really recycled. But if a recycling bin is cheaper than a second cart, that it might be worth it to do the recycling. But I don't know, I think we do need to look into it.
No, I agree with you. I remember going on that tour, and it was like a lot of the stuff that they think is recyclable isn't. Like greasy pizza boxes. There was a bunch of stuff that people would just think, hey, it's cardboard, throw it in there, or hey, it's this, and not realizing that it's not recyclable.
Well, I think everything changed after China wasn't purchasing any of their recycling from other countries because of that documentary. It changed kind of the scope. And so now I think, what was it like, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was like a 30% now that is actually recycled, and everything else is, although it's sent to the recycling center, they throw it in a landfill anyway. And so just really doing that outreach and showing people what can be recycled, like for example, something that's pure just without any, labels and stuff like that can be recycled. But also their shredding, which was really interesting. They did mention that don't add that to your recycling bin, keep it separate because it contaminates the recycling. And it was interesting to see, but also interesting to see when you don't shred your papers, you can actually see all the information. Remember on that conveyor belt that we went
Oh,
on?
yeah. I remember. Yep.
That we saw. So anyway,
I have a question for you, and you may have explained it already, so I apologize. Why was everything, roughly 3 to 5% raise, but non-potable water was an 8% increase?
great question. Didn't probably go into it in enough detail. So what drives the cost for potable water or for non-potable water increase are our staff time costs, our supply costs, those things that have more of a normal inflationary increase to it. And what drives the potable water rate increase is directly tied to what Greeley will charge us for increased water treatment costs.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Great. Well, we'll keep moving on, and if there's questions at the end, we'll still have a few minutes to address them. So in those same enterprise funds, but talking now system development fees or those TAP fees, it's a different, again, another set of numbers that we're applying to these. And this rate increase for these TAP fees is 5.6%. And so the basis we've used for this for the past number of years comes from the Engineering News Record Index. And what that tries to do is more closely tie cost increases to construction cost increase. So when we're talking impact fees or system development fees, this is money that's being received on new development for construction, for building the infrastructure to service new growth. So instead of having just a normal DOLA inflationary index and having something more closely tied to construction, makes more sense for these types of fees. So that, like I said, is 5.6% for all three of these enterprises. And what that means for a single family home with a 3/4 inch tap is an increase of $549. Similarly, for wastewater, that 5.6%, you can see in the inside city rate, single family home is that top row there. We're currently at $9,623, and that'll go up to $10,162. So an increase there of $539. And then the storm drainage increase, because those rates are less, that inflationary adjustment is $46 for a residential lot under 10,000 square feet. So that would bring that rate up to $866. And these are all pieces that obviously we'll include in the fee schedule, and we'll have Heather Utra to help to communicate out. So as folks are looking at building permits and developments coming in, they have these rates as quickly as possible. And then on the impact fees that are non-enterprise fund, we have a number of them: transportation, park, fire, police, and school. The transportation and park impact fees by our city code calls out that these are to be adjusted annually by that DOLA Consumer Price Index. So applying that 8.011% is what we'll add to our park facility impact fee. Excuse me. But then on the transportation impact fee, City Council recently study. So we will adopt in this those updated rates for not apply an additional inflationary rates. Fire and police, I'll just say, in our city charter are called out to be by that Engineering News Record. Specifically say these fees shall be adjusted by these indices. So we will apply that 5.6% as that code directs us to for next year's fees. And then the school impact fee remains unchanged unless the school district informs us that they have a desire to change those rates. Last couple of years. And that touches the major fees. With direction tonight, we will finalize the fee schedule for everything that will go into place January 1 for user rates and fees and all of those great things. And that's what I'll bring back to council at the next meeting. Is there any other questions or thoughts as we move to incorporate these?
Is 5.6% enough to keep up with inflation and GDP?
Great question. We all hope. You know, we do use the prior year's index. So we'll look at that index. That's 2022's rates. So 5.6, it was less than I expected, and I actually expected construction to be higher than DOLA's at 8.01. So I'd imagine that'll come down next year. I'm not sure what the construction index will do. Maybe it'll hover still at that 5 or 6%. I know we use 6% for a lot of our magic, hopeful inflationary numbers on major projects too. I hope it's enough. I don't. I'm one to usually not have cause for panic unless there's cause and numbers to show that. This feels like we're continuing to take the right steps to apply consistent methodology to make sure that we're ahead of the costs a little bit.
Any other additional questions, comments?
I just want to also know, how do we compare with our tap fees to other local municipalities in NOCO? I mean, I don't really know if there's an answer for that, because we're not scouting that, but.
Actually, we do.
Okay.
So when we presented the transportation impact fee, Heather Utrata again did a comparison. What does it cost to build a single family home here compared to Greeley, Loveland, Fort Collins, Windsor, and showed that we were becoming a more expensive end of that spectrum. But everybody's going through this process. Everyone will be increasing fees in January. Everyone's doing a lot of these impact fee studies. So I think what it showed us is we're remaining competitive with
Good.
those fees. I'm happy to share that information.
Yeah.
Basically showing our proposed numbers to their current numbers.
Exactly.
So once the other surrounding communities update their
Sure.
numbers, then it'll be more apples to apples at that point.
It'd be nice to see that, just as we're wanting to be competitive for new rooftops, and if we're pricing ourselves out, we're not pricing it high enough.
Well, right now we're overpriced compared to some of the local. I mean, it's less, it costs less to build in Greeley than it would here. But they're looking at raising their prices. We're just ahead of the game on ours. So
Thank you.
my concern or question is, and this is all fine and great, but there's several places that we all see in town where it's just a half-acre lot or a 1 acre lot or whatever, and especially on the east end of town where there isn't any development. And a lot of people will purchase a property anticipating that they would build their house there, and then find out that they have a high cost for the fees to build it. And it's just, with the price of the house after you build it, it just would not make sense to build, put in $60,000-$70,000 worth of fees to build a house, and you just would not recuperate that. So my question is, I mean, I would like to consider a grant or a discount in those circumstances, that you would have a single person or a family wanting to build a house in an area where it might not make as much sense. I know, Basler's building all those homes they're selling for $300,000. You go to some places on the east side and nothing has been developed there because, really you would build that house and it would take you 20 years to get your $300,000 back out of it. So, I mean, just to encourage some of the infill, and I'm not talking, I'm just talking about single family or single resident. I'm not talking about a developer. But I just kind of wanted to float that idea to encourage some development in the infill areas.
Yeah, I think that's completely reasonable, and it's not uncommon to see that incentivized infill development. Certainly something that we could work into the fee schedule pretty easily. So I hear from Mayor Pro Tem that this is an interest. Do we have a majority of the council that wants us to take a look at that?
Yeah, I'd like to.
I think if we looked into some sort of grants out there that would help in a specific area, I'm sure there is, especially when it comes to affordable housing.
I'm
Now,
not
for
even talking about a
clarification,
grant. I'm talking about too, just waiving partial of our fees that.
So like our impact fees.
It would be internal, so whenever somebody
Okay.
would come to us with an application for infill development in the established part of town, then pursuant to your direction, we could waive a portion or, whatever amount that you're directing us. So this wouldn't be an external grant, this would be
Intern.
internal.
I'd be interested in taking a look at it.
Yeah, I would look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
to see
only
how that
concern
looks.
that I see is how would we police that to make sure
Exactly.
someone didn't purchase and then turn it into a rental property? So we're discounting for a rental unit. How would we secure, that would be my only concern. I'm all for discounting rates, but we'd have to have an agreement with the potential builder, that single family, that they have to hold the property for.
Make sure it's gonna be owner occupied.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be part of the discount deal, is that
Yeah.
it's owner occupied. Because I do know of a section of property that this family bought. with anticipation on putting, I think, one or two, it was a larger piece, it was a half a block, so, maybe an acre, that they would have loved to have had two homes where the whole family each, bought did a home. But after they came to the conclusion of they wouldn't be able to put in a home that would make any kind of sense,
And I agree
it's a
with that.
field now, still.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I would just be concerned about
Yeah.
poaching,
Exactly.
having
Yeah.
someone come in,
Yes.
and then why would we as the city approve the discounting for them to then charge $1,800 a month in rent?
Right.
Right.
And I would like to throw out there that rather than incorporating this into any sort of a fee schedule, this could be something that was a separate economic development policy to where we could have stipulation, we could have criteria built into that policy, bring that back at a future work session, and we could maybe, and I shared with the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem earlier that one of the things I'm looking at doing in 2024 is dedicating work sessions beginning second meeting in January for departmental specific, say 60 minutes for economic development on this date. And we can dive in deeper into some of these, the Randy's Diner site and new development going on, whether it's 85 or 23rd, whatever the case may be. And this is something at that point that we could spend the next couple of months putting some information together, bring a policy back to you guys for consideration at that time, and then we could keep it separate from the utility fees, the fee structure. That way, it's much easier to administer, much easier to keep that oversight on.
But can we also, I mean, since we're heading that direction, find and see if there's something out there, like a grant that we can utilize in-house, like internally for people in that specific area? I think, it would be advantageous to see if there's something out there, just to help with that.
That sounds like a great task for Curtis.
Sounds like an excellent.
Yes.
There you go. There's your answer. Right there. Raise your hand.
Fred had some.
Yeah, I think majority of the council are kind of that. Fred, you had something to add?
Yeah, we also have discovered that, particularly in the older part of town, that there are large sections of it that were the open space that we have for development over there was used as a trash dump. And this actually, the corner of First Avenue and 32nd Street, when I first got on city council, they were anticipating building some quote-unquote affordable housing, apartment buildings there, and that's they did their first investigation of the site and found out that it was a trash dump, and they had been very eager to get this going with me when they presented it to me, but that was it.
That corner too, though, is also in the floodplain.
Yep. That was discovered later.
Can we also find out how many areas are in, areas where there's potential homes that can go in there? Just, kind of plot it and see, because we can also see what that would look like for us as far as how much monies we would be, in essence, discounting from impact fees, just to get an idea and look at what that looks like. I think that would be great, because then we can plan out and kind of plan for that.
Yeah, we'll prepare all that information. We'll bring it back January. We have that conversation.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Anything additional? Good. All right. Thank you very much, Jackie. And I know you're on the next one too, so
Yes.
let's go ahead and go with the budget revision number 2.
Sure. And I didn't prepare a presentation on this one because there's just a few things to talk about, which
All
is
right.
great for a budget revision. Hopefully Councilmember Crabtree doesn't get used to that. Normally these are very long. So we did just have a few things detailed in the staff report. And also in your packet is our normal attachment A that goes through each of the items by fund. And then included in that is the long range plan for each of impacted funds. So you can see what ending fund balances are and how that would look to those funds. So this is our last budget revision of the year. So really the purpose of this is to formalize direction that City Council's already given staff throughout the year and really just make sure that the budget as a living document properly reflects some of the additional direction that council's given for the last few months. So we have just a couple of things in there. In the general fund, we are incorporating the Safer Streetlight Grant Program. So happy to be moving forward with that project. So $870,000 of both grant revenue and expenditure. So a net zero to the general fund. The second item in the staff report is actually a correction to the ordinance that we did for the budget revision in the springtime. And so the intention was to increase general fund revenue because of additional fees and known revenue at that time by about $298,000. And we had a error in that ordinance that left off the 2 and only increased it by $98,000. So we need to true that up at this point. Reviews are good when we're able to find those things. We are increasing the police department professional services by the amount of the new contract with NOCO Humane. So as that rate has doubled, would have put the police department in a little bit of a scramble to try to find that additional almost $22,000. So asking for that be included in the budget. We are including the purchase of the front end loader and the 2 dump trucks, and recognizing that additional severance tax revenue that we've already received. You'll remember that was higher than we had budgeted in this year's budget. So we'll show both the revenue and expense for those. And then adding $42,000 of additional budget for the fleet department. So fleet's been doing a great job of scrimping and saving and trying to find every dollar that he can use to get necessary items. But we definitely didn't want to move into the winter season without snow blades and proper equipment and things. So definitely give Cameron a ton of credit for trying to really find money and maximize everything they could. In the budget revision, we're recognizing $13,000 of revenue that came in from scrap. Also, so trying to utilize those money that came in, as well as a little bit of additional to get their budget up to what he needs for this year. And then we have 3 other items that are not included in the general fund. Council recently increased a design for the Evans Ditch Trail project by $111,000 to meet CDOT requirements. So with that approval, we'll bring that back to the budget so that that's available to spend. Our refuse fund that we talked about continues to have increased cost for those trash collections and operations. So I think we underestimated this last year the number of accounts that we had in there. So needing to make sure that when we get that final bill in December and we have to accrue that at year end, that we are not exceeding expenditures. And the state is much happier when we do that. So doing that kind of as a little bit of a precaution as well. And then the wastewater fund, lastly, increasing, don't even have the dollar amount in my staff report, apologize for that, representing the lift station that will be constructed at the southwest corner of 31st Street and Highway 85, as approved as part of that development agreement. Prudent for us to include and appropriate those dollars in the wastewater fund as well.
Wasn't that like 300-something thousand?
It was, yep.
306.
Got it. So with that, just a few items for cleanup. If there's agreement from council and not that way, then we'll bring it for consideration at first reading of that ordinance to modify the budget at the next meeting, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments?
I have none.
I have none. It's
Thank
pretty
you.
straightforward. Right?
It's great, straightforward.
Great.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
Jackie. Thank you again.
Bill.
Appreciate it.
Turn it over to Scott.
Scott, you're gonna get plenty of time for this today, because I know sometimes you usually get cut short, so.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. While Scott's coming over here, I do
Okay.
want to say thank you to Cody, because I know that we had mentioned it to him about the recycling, and him and his staff got on it. And to have $13,000 added back into the budget because of scrap iron that had been sitting around for years is phenomenal. And I just want to tell you that I appreciate that you had that done.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Doug and Cameron back there have done a fantastic job as well.
Yeah, guys. Appreciate it. All right, we got the 2023 legislative updates.
Scott, go slow.
Right?
We always cut you off, so just
That's why I
take
said he's
your
got plenty of time today.
So
Get out
exciting.
of-
You have an hour and a
Can we
half.
start from the back? Because that's what normally gets cut off.
Thank you.
Is it really 5:34?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
I've
planned
been
for
through
that.
some.
I just wanted to make sure because I said, they're like, wow, we got through 2 items already that we were planning an hour.
Just for the landlords alone, it's been.
You had them right up to 160.
Yeah, right up to 160. Well, thanks, council. There were actually 160 bills passed by the legislature that affect municipalities, but we will just talk about a small group of those tonight. You have in front of you a memo that is divided into sections. The first section is the general section, it's the 100s. And then that's where most of our discussions will focus. The other sections are sort of by departments. And the 200s are all the ones that affect the police department. There's a section for city clerk, for municipal court, for HR, and so forth. But and so we'll circulate this memo to all of the different departments, and then if they have questions, then we'll circle back around with them. And I've given you all of the various sections, not all 160 bills, but my intent in doing so is that if we cover some of these tonight and you read through the rest of them and it's in the HR section and you have questions, please feel free to give us a call and we'll either come back and share with the entire council some discussion of that if it seems appropriate, or we'll certainly answer any questions you've got about specific bills. So starting off with the general section, there are a couple of liquor licensing bills that came up this year and were passed. And there seems to be this trend within the liquor licensing division, the LED Liquor Enforcement Division at the state, to encourage the legislature, and the legislature has responded, to create more and more different types of liquor licenses, allowing more and more different types of events where they can serve liquor. And the first one there, last year the legislature created an art gallery license, so that if you own an art gallery, then you can serve liquor a certain number of times per year. The bill this year extended the concept to all businesses that sell goods or services to the public if they have a physical location in Colorado and receive less than 50% of its gross sales from food and a few other requirements. So now you're saying essentially any retail business or most retail businesses can have these types of retail establishment permits for up to, I think it's 24 days per year. We haven't really seen a lot of this yet, but it's another one that's out there. Then another one that is fairly new is this festival permit. This is item 101. And under the old law, you could obtain a permit to hold up to 9 festivals per year. And then, as you may recall, other people could sign up under the licensee's permit. And they've expanded that now so you can hold up to 52 festivals per year. So again, sort of increasing the availability of liquor licensing. And a group of staff had a discussion today because when we were here a couple months ago, there was a question about the ability of food trucks to sell liquor.
I asked that, yeah.
So we sort of circle back around. The state has sort of addressed the issue, and it looks like there may be legislation that addresses it. But essentially, as you may recall, your city clerk said, no, there's not a liquor license for food trucks, and that's correct. There was a regulation that was promulgated by the LED, the Liquor Enforcement Division, saying, in essence, food trucks don't satisfy the premises requirements or the equipment requirements for a liquor license. So that seemed to be a pretty clear answer that food trucks can't get liquor licenses. Well, then the LED struck that part of the regulation. So that kind of left everybody wondering, does that mean that food trucks can get liquor licenses? And they sort of clarified it by saying, no, we're not taking that position. But they haven't really said what the position is that they are taking. We think that the general answer from LED right now is that food trucks cannot get liquor licenses except as perhaps part of what's called a festival permit.
Okay, and that's kind of what we were asking about, because it was like Heritage Day and stuff like that, like, you know,
Right.
that little carts and like stuff. Okay.
And even under the festival permit, it's pretty limited. If you have a liquor license, then you can arguably bring a food truck to a festival and sell liquor. The problem with the LED is that the premise has to be defined. It has to be a place they can go to and say, yeah, you're in compliance, or no, you're not. And because food trucks by nature move around, they aren't convinced that that's really a premise. So there is a very narrow window of opportunity for festival permittees to be able to do that. But there's also legislation that's, we think, may be proposed. It hasn't actually been proposed yet for what's called a catering license or a catering permit. And that may be another place where the regulations could identify food trucks as if you qualified for the catering event and you were a food truck, then you could serve liquor. So I think it's essentially more to come on that topic. But for now, we've taken the position that there are not liquor licenses for food trucks. So
Unless festival,
what's that?
unless it's a festival,
I'm sorry.
unless they're at a festival, like for example, Heritage Day.
Yeah, but even then, it's pretty narrow because they have an independent license. Like if you have an existing brew pub in town and you have a liquor license
Okay.
and you have a food truck, you could get the festival permit, and at that festival, you could sell alcohol because you have that sort of underlying liquor license.
Got it.
So
Okay.
that's why I say it's a fairly narrow exception at this point, and it may get broadened a little bit by this catering permit that they're thinking about.
So basically, I'm just gonna use this as an example, On the Hook Fish and Chips could come to Heritage Days, but they couldn't apply to sell liquor there if they were, it's only if you have an established.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you can have things at Heritage Days that serve liquor, it just can't be in the form of a food truck.
Got it.
Unless they have this underlying license.
Okay.
Yeah, you can still do at least as much as you did last year. And I'm not suggesting that it's a distinction that makes sense. You know, whether it's you put a tent up and you can sell liquor out of it, or you park a food truck there and you can sell liquor out of it. But that's the distinction that the Liquor Enforcement Division is
It's
making.
because you see all, within the state, all those like little cute like carriage trailers like that are converted.
Third horse trailers.
And then
I know several people that have that.
They sell liquor. So granted, it's not a food truck per se,
They'll show up to your baby shower
Yeah.
and serve cocktails, or your wedding shower, or whatever. So I don't know, I think there's still some kind of a loophole somewhere.
Yeah.
Well,
Those are for private events. Public events.
For private events.
Well, even for public events, there was one narrow category that people were talking about for a while, is that if it was a trailer, therefore not capable of being readily moved, that you might be able to get it for that.
Okay.
So it's an area that's really not well defined,
Right.
and we're hoping for some clarity. So
Some of them have shown up to like stock show.
Yeah.
So that would be a different category, obviously. But
Operating underneath that special permit license that the stock show has.
they have their underlying
Mhm.
licenses, so I think that's how they're doing that. But anyway, probably more to come on food trucks and liquor licenses. The next one I wanted to talk about is number 103, amenities for all genders in public buildings. So this only applies if you are renovating a public building or building a new public building. But restrooms are going to have a different look in the future for those two categories of buildings. If it's a renovation after January 1st of 2024 and it's publicly accessible, then a building that is being renovated by a local government has to ensure that any single stall restroom is not a gender-specific restroom, or remodel the restroom to allow use of multi-stall restroom by any gender if certain facility features are met pursuant to the International Plumbing Code. It doesn't really say what those facility features are that have to be met in order for it to be a multi-gender facility, but you can no longer have single-gender, single-stall restrooms in renovated buildings. The other concern that it addressed is not just the gender-related restrooms, but also changing stations. So by that January 1st, 2024 date, if you're renovating, then you have to have at least one diaper changing station in a single-stall, non-gendered restroom or room with similar amenities. That's 2024. Then in 2025, they apply those same standards to restrooms that are only accessible to employees and students. And then if it's new construction, then you have to essentially have one of the non-gender restrooms on each floor and one of the diaper changing stations on each floor. So probably something to keep in mind when you're looking at possibilities for your police station. Then you also have to have appropriate signage, and that's to be done by January 1 of 2024. As I say, I think that applies to renovations and new construction. I don't think you'll necessarily have to change anything with this building. So, 105 is public use of elected officials' social media, and more elected officials are finding social media as an efficient way to communicate with their constituency. There have been several instances over the past couple of years where in those social media forums, they have received either threatening responses or what they consider to be inappropriate responses. And the question is, if it's a public figure, can you shut off those people's access to your social media platform? This act allows elected officials to either permanently or temporarily restrict or ban someone from their elected officials' private social media, and I emphasize private social media because if it's one that's provided by the city, then you really can't shut them off unless you shut everybody off. But if it's a private one, you can shut them off for now. There's a note of caution here because the U.S. Supreme Court has taken this issue up, and the Supreme Court sits in October of every year, so they just sat last month, and then they issue decisions between now and usually February of next year. So they probably had oral argument on this issue already, but we don't have a decision.
Can I ask a question about this one? Because when it's private, but then what constitutes private? Because, you know, some will argue that, well, if you post things that have to do with you as an elected official, in essence, it's no longer private because the public should be able to see it or participate in whatever you're posting. I mean,
This act and most of the cases focus on who's paying for it. Okay. So if it is your private, Facebook account, then that's deemed a private one. But if it's one that is provided by the city or paid for by the city, then that's usually deemed to be a public one.
So that's how we just differentiate in essence. Okay.
What we've seen so far, that's the differentiation.
Okay.
Whether the Supreme Court agrees with that or not, I don't know, but we'll hopefully know soon.
That comes up a lot, especially when at the Code of Ethics, especially for a lot in this area,
right,
where that is a question that's raised constantly. You cannot block me. You cannot delete this or whatnot. So.
Yeah, and it's really a balancing between First Amendment rights and sort of your own personal, not necessarily a privacy right, but it's personal property or own account is. And in First Amendment analysis, you usually look at whether it is a public forum. It goes back to the old days of when there was the soapbox in the town park. And that was deemed to be a public forum, and there were almost no limits on First Amendments for public forums. And so here they're saying that you can put some limits on private forums, and defining private forum as one that the individual is paid for.
Thank you.
And then this one, I'm sure all of you have been waiting for. This is 106. The Lunar New Year Day is an observed state holiday. I don't want to suggest that I'm old, but I didn't know specifically what a lunar calendar was, much less a lunar New Year Day. Lunar calendar, as I found out, is one that's based on the various stages of the moon each month, and the Colorado legislature deemed it appropriate to declare the first Friday in February as Lunar New Year Day. It's an observed date holiday, observed state holiday, which means that the state recognizes it, but it doesn't mean time off for either state or local employees, so less interest at that point. 107 is the Natural Medicine Regulation and Legalization Act, and this is the implementation of Proposition 122 that we talked about earlier this year. It's the magic mushrooms, and this is the act that starts to promulgate Proposition 122. It's the natural psilocybins, and it expressly prohibits local governments from prohibiting licensed facilitators or licensed entities from operating in their jurisdiction. So you can't ban treatment centers or facility centers, but you still can regulate time, place, and manner of those licensed entities. The Act also makes it clear, the Act really is pretty protective of individual use of the psychedelic mushrooms, but it also makes it clear that employers still have an interest in prohibiting working while under the influence of psychedelic mushrooms, and operating motor vehicle while under impairment from those mushrooms. So that's just an update from what we talked about earlier. 108 is another effort at transparency for metro districts. We're still hearing lots of complaints and surprised by homeowners who buy into a subdivision and don't realize that they also bought into a metro district. And just when they thought that this, when they see their tax bill is when they get that first shock. And invariably they call town hall and say, well, why didn't you tell me this? And if they pull out their materials, there's things all over it that tell them you're in a special district, you may be in a special district, now it's in large bold print, but it's still happening. So the state has enacted a few more requirements for transparency. Probably the most important ones is that the new metro district must include a maximum mill levy and a maximum debt issuance in their service plan. And that's something we've been doing in Evans for at least a decade. So that's not really new for us, but now it is statewide. They have also required that there be an annual meeting with information about outstanding projects and debt and allow for questions from the public. And since these are public entities, that may sound like kind of a strange thing to add as a requirement, but you have to keep in mind that these metro districts a lot of times were set up by specific developers. And the last thing the developers really want to do is have what can sometimes be exhausting meetings listening to public comment. It's a concept you're probably unfamiliar with, but because they just want to essentially get the business done to get the metro district keep running and issuing debt and things like that, many of the metro districts didn't allow public comment. They just got on there, did their business, and they were done. Now they have to allow public comment. Another practice that these are aimed at is a developer would put a lot of money into the project, and then in order to reimburse the developer for the money they put in, the district would issue bonds and repay the developer. And oftentimes those repayment commitments by the district would have very high interest rates for the benefit of the developer. So they put in new limits this year that those developer payment bonds are to be reviewed by a municipal financial advisor to make sure that they're reasonable. And it has specific criteria as to what constitutes reasonable. So. It also requires sellers within a district to provide purchasers the district website. You may recall that last year was when they instituted the requirement that each metro district have a website that people can access. Proposition HH. I'm not suggesting we spend a lot of time on it this evening because we don't know if it's going to pass. And it's also a cop-out because I'm not sure I understand it yet.
If you understand it, that's not good.
Every time I think I do, then I hear something else that, no, I didn't have that right. So essentially, overall, it's an effort to reduce property taxes and raise the state's Tabor limit so that it can use those extra funds to backfill the property taxes from the reduced assessment rates. But beyond that, I suggest we hold off that discussion till, unless somebody's just dying to talk about HH, but.
No.
I was going to check.
He was like grunting.
I was going to check the wire to see what the numbers were on HH, but I don't know that they'd have any numbers.
Owning.
Grunting.
Rip off.
What time? 7:10.
It's in the 10.
7:10, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have a little bit of time. The next section is the 200s, which all relate to police activities. I'm not going to go nearly through all of them. I just want to, I don't want the chief's head to get too big. I was going to put a plug in for the police department, though, because when I look at the number of bills that they enacted this year and the last couple years, it just boggles my mind. And from a legal liability standpoint, I am so glad that we have the police department we do, because there are so many new rules for police officers. There are new offenses. There are new procedures that it's a very difficult profession to be in right now. So I'll highlight a couple of them, but overall, I just want to let you know how many of them there were. And these are just, this is not all of them, but this is just some examples. There's new rules on reporting overdose events You know, if you're going to report someone and you happen to have been using with whoever's suffering the overdose, there were some rule changes that say you're not in as much trouble, but they've modified those rules now for if you hang around and help the police and help the person who is suffering the overdose, then it's even a lesser offense. It's unlawful to aim laser device at an aircraft now, except under certain conditions. There's new rules on auto theft, on reporting emergencies. This one, number 205, seems to me like an interesting one to challenge, to enforce if you are a police officer. It requires unserialized firearms and components, including those generated by 3D printers, to be imprinted with a serial number by January 1st, 2024. I don't know how you find the unserialized.
Right. Or who are you supposed to take it to get it
Right,
serialized?
and then make sure that they are serialized. And, you know, with 3D printers, it's a little bit beyond my imagination how you even make an unserialized gun, but it does happen. So, another challenge for the police. There's new admissibility. One I wanted to talk about just a minute is this 214, restrictions on governmental involvement in immigration detention. And the bill prohibits state and local governments, so the city, from entering into agreements with private entities for funding private entities to detain individuals in detention facility operated by a private entity. So the state legislature has taken the position that we are not going to assist in deportation efforts, essentially. Then this number 217 I wanted to mention just because you are now the proud owners of a roundabout. And there is a new rule about roundabouts that if you're in a roundabout with a vehicle that's more than 35 feet long or 10 feet wide, you have to yield to that vehicle. And that's just really a practical consideration. Semis were having some real issues getting through roundabouts. So, then the 300s relate to municipal court and code enforcement, and 301, I just want to mention, we won't get into the details, but essentially if the city now abates a property, including problems with weeds, brush, and other removal from the property, and this includes both alleys behind and the grass areas in front of a property. It used to be you could only get a lien against the property. Well, you could always get a lien against the property, but it used to be the county clerk and treasurer wouldn't certify that lien to be collected in the same way as taxes unless it was for a utility, such as water. So under the old law, if the city cut off your water service and you didn't pay it, you could put a lien against the property, and if the property sold, that lien would not be wiped out. It sticks with it just like property taxes. So, but that was only for water service, electrical service, if you provide electricity, utilities. The clerks used to take the position that if it wasn't something that, served the property, then you couldn't do that type of lien. And this act says that if the city cleans up brush and trash and those kinds of things, that you can now lien that property, and it has that same kind of priority as a utility lien. So we're hopeful that that may provide some support to court enforcement officers. Number 303 is remote public access to criminal court proceedings. And what it said in essence was, if there is a criminal court proceeding, you have to provide remote access to anyone that wants to listen to that proceeding. Then it started with some exceptions, like except if you don't have the technological ability to do that, except if you don't have the staff to do that. And a lot of smaller jurisdictions, that was a pretty important exceptions. Mm-hmm. Then we got a couple of not case rulings out of the Colorado Supreme Court, but just directives from the Colorado Supreme Court. And this is one thing that Supreme Court justices get very protective of, which is the ability of a judge to control its own courtroom. They really think that that should be up to the judge to make those decisions. So they sent out a directive saying, yeah, you should make it available if you agree. If you think it's appropriate for this particular case to be publicized or broadcast, or if you think in general it's appropriate and you have the staff and the resources to do it, that's fine. But if you don't, that's your decision. So it really eviscerated a lot of this act. There has not been a case that's gone up yet. No one has really challenged it. But sort of an interesting appeal if you think about it, and it goes to the Supreme Court, and they've already issued this directive. Well, you either know how that case is going to come out, or do you try and disqualify the entire Supreme Court because they've already made up their mind? I don't know. But anyway, as far as Evans Municipal Court, Judge Stewart has issued an order that says, in essence, because of staff limitations, that they're not going to be broadcasting all of the proceedings. And Greeley has done the same thing. Greeley, who has more staff, said, you know, we don't need to add another staff member just to broadcast court proceedings. Court proceedings are open. If people want to come, they can. In general, they're not going to broadcast it. That's all. Under city clerk, which are the 400s, number 402 has a campaign practices amendment that says, in essence, and just for those of you who may be running in the near future, there is a limit of $400 per donor toward your campaigns, or if you have a campaign committee, then the most of that committee can contribute toward your election campaign is $4,000. So just keep those in mind when the elections roll around. Number 405 is access to government records, which makes some changes to Cora. And most of these won't really change anything you're doing, but there are changes both to the process for Cora requests, Colorado Open Records Act requests, as well as a couple of substantive changes. In terms of process, it relates mostly to digital format information and says that if the record is in digital format, then you have to make it available in digital format. And it also says that if all you're providing is a digital record, then you can't charge a per page fee. And that sounds appropriate. The concern that's been expressed by clerks and others around the municipal community is one of the problems with Cora is that it's really easy to make the request, but it's often really time consuming to respond to the request, and you have to do it presumptively in 3 days, or if you can show that it's burdensome, you can get up to 7 days to respond. So you'll get these requests that are sometimes just huge, especially from some of the media outlets, and you'll have 7 days to respond, and there's just really no way to do it. Well, up until this change, you could charge a per page fee, and for every hour over the first hour, you could charge $35, which you can still do. And that would discourage some of these that were just, I guess for lack of a better word, I would call fishing expeditions. But since there is no per page charge anymore, there's still a time charge. It makes it even easier for people to make very, very large Cora requests. And we haven't seen that in Evans yet. We've seen it in a couple of our other jurisdictions. So that's the procedural change that they made to Cora. And then there were two substantive changes.
Oh, sorry, Scott. So can we charge that instead of a per page? Can we just charge a digital fee then?
I'm sorry?
Can we just charge a digital fee, a flat out fee for digital records?
No, you can't charge anything for a digital record other than time. And if it takes you more than an hour to respond, then you can charge $35 an hour for every additional hour.
All right.
As far as the actual digital fee, it says you can't charge anything.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. It says per page, so that's why I was saying,
Yeah.
if we're doing it digitally, it's $50.
Yep. Yeah, I'm sure somebody will try that, but I think the statute's pretty clear that if it's digital, you just got to send it for free in terms of materials.
Okay.
In terms of substantive changes, some elected officials were putting together lists of names and addresses of constituents so they could communicate with them. And then they were getting Cora requests from advertising companies or who knows who for those lists. So they amended the statute to say that a custodian can deny an inspection of telephone numbers and home addresses provided by a person to an elected official for the purpose of future electronic communications. So those are no longer available. And then the other one, which is mostly just situational, didn't have anything to do obviously with Evans, but now the act requires disclosure of records of sexual harassment complaints made against an elected official if the results of the investigation show that the misconduct occurred. So that's one just that's out there now that wasn't. Then 505 is the Public Workers Workplace Protections, and this one has gotten lots of discussion by the municipalities. What it says is that we've always had this process, and it's in your code and it's in your charter, about council members communicating with staff and staff communicating with council members. And usually when we do the orientation, we talk about the funnel, that you have council up here and all that information funnels through the city manager and then gets dispersed to all the city staff. And likewise, if city staff has concerns, that gets funneled up through the city manager and then out to the council. Well, if it's a matter of public concern, and if it's done when the employee is not on duty, not on uniform, the funnel is no longer permitted. So what it says is that public employees, including municipal ones, can engage in protected, concerted activity for the purposes of mutual aid or protection. But here's the part that really changed things. Fully participate in the political process while off duty, not in uniform, including speaking with their governing body on terms and conditions of employment and any matter of public concern. So those are pretty broad. There was concern that this would really break down the ability of city managers to manage. We haven't seen that. But I think that the best interpretation that I would suggest of the statute is that it does allow staff, public employees, to talk to each of you individually about their terms and conditions of employment and about matters of public concern. They have to do it on their own time. They have to do it not in uniform. And if they do that, it's up to you as council members how you want to respond. It doesn't mean that you have to address those concerns. You can certainly do that and talk to them about their concerns, but that could also include reminding them that, in general, the council works through the manager, so you can bring those concerns to the manager and have them address them. So I don't think that it necessarily eliminates the funnel concept, but I think it does allow the employees to bring some of their concerns directly to you, and then you have to decide what you want to do with those concerns. Number 602 is, and these are in the area of economic development, community development. It's a Proposition 1, 2, 3 affordable housing programs. And the only reason that I wanted to mention this is the one that you passed a resolution to opt into just a couple of meetings ago. So this is just the act that provides some support for what qualifies as low-income housing and provides some opportunities for developers to access that funding if the city has opted into the program.
Scott, we actually didn't opt into it.
And you did opt into it, and that was primarily because you had at least one developer that said they might be interested in using some of those funds.
Oh.
So you've opted in. You're not required to do anything now that you've opted in, but if there's an opportunity to encourage development.
Oh, I didn't think
we opted out.
We opted out because we wanted to get more information on it,
Right.
and then maybe look at it year 2.
Oh, okay.
This particular one, we opted out, and then we asked staff to bring more information to us because we were very unclear of the language of it, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. And Drew handled that, and that's my bad. Yeah, so you can opt in. It's a 3-year program. You can opt in year 2 or year 3 when you get more information. Okay. Then 701 is a technology accessibility cleanup, and there's really not much. Doesn't really change anything, but in 2021 there was the digital accessibility bill, which said essentially if you have a website and other social media available, that you have to make them accessible to anyone who's suffering under some type of a disability, such as hearing, sight, anything like that. And this just fleshes out some of the requirements of what you have to do. I don't know where the city is exactly in that process, but I'm sure that Chris Bragg is aware of this, and I just pointed this one out primarily so that he can see the latest updates. Then in the area of finance, 801, this is carry-out bags, the 10-cent charge. And the only changes were that originally it's a 10-cent fee for non-reusable bags, and originally a part of that goes to local governments. Originally that remitting the part that goes to local governments was supposed to happen in 2024, but they've got enough of it accumulated that it started in 2023. So you should be seeing some of those funds. And if the city doesn't have a process, and I meant to check with Jackie, but I think we do. Yeah, we do, because if you didn't, then the stores could hold on to those funds and use them for their own purposes that relate to providing more recyclable bags or things like that. But you guys have yours in place, so.
So,
Do we know?
excuse,
Sorry, go ahead. No.
well, I was gonna say, so it'll be reported to us, it'll be paid to us, and are there stipulations on what we can use it for?
I think you have to use it for recycling. I think recycling is probably the best general category.
All those monies that we get in are in our refuse fund. So we can use it, it'll be part of what council looks at, spring budget work session of how to do it. I think we actually have $5,000 or $6,000.
Yep.
Wow. We have a process, there's a form on our website that businesses can fill out as they remit, the bag fees.
So we can have the discussion on where we wanna allocate those funds when that happens, okay?
Well, and the act came out of a local enactment in Aspen. And there are things that tied plastic bag fee to what they spent it on. It was pretty generous. So I think it's recycling, but I don't think that necessarily means that it's just strictly recycling. I think that there are lots of things you can do in waste management in that area that, with those funds, when you talk about that.
It'll be a great conversation.
And I think that's it. There's several more on there, and we can certainly come back and talk to you about the others, but those are the ones that seem to have the most direct effect on events that we saw.
Great. Any questions, comments? I think. Nope, seeing none. Scott, great. Thank you very much for the update.
Mr. Mayor, I just have one question. And Scott, I'm curious, going into the 2024 legislative session, do you have any idea on what Senate Bill 23-213 is looking like? I've heard it's going to be broke up into multiple bills moving forward, but was curious if you had any insight on that.
I don't have a lot of insight on it. I can check with the Public Policy Committee at CML and kind of see where they are on it. The last that I heard is it was going to be broken up into separate bills, and some of it was just going to be done by executive order. That Governor Polis was adamant enough about some of it that he was going to try and do it just on his own.
Is it the land use?
Yeah,
this
that's
is
the
the
I was
one.
actually going to ask Mary Young when she
Well,
was here.
because I did notice that when one of the people from its cabinet was appointed to the DOLA to kind of oversee some of that stuff. So I was just not, I was curious about that move.
Right.
And so now it makes sense that it's gonna be kind of,
Process.
Right. Well, and under the proposal, 213 proposal, when it came out in its last form last year, DOLA changed from mostly a state agency that provided assistance to municipalities to a regulatory
yeah.
agency that would have a lot of control over municipalities. So I'm not surprised that he would put somebody from his cabinet over in charge of DOLA. That seems to be consistent with trying to push that agenda again. We'll see it, whether it's going to be in the form of multiple pieces of legislation, some executive orders, or what it's going to be, but we'll keep an eye on it.
The question I was going to ask Mary Young when she was here.
Yeah.
So,
Well, she mentioned she vouched for us and voted against it.
Other questions?
I think we're good. Thank
All
you
right.
for the update. Appreciate it.
awesome.
Yes, actually gave you more time than normal. All right, everybody. Well, we got 45 minutes until we start.
Jackie, back up.
Or yeah, Jackie, you have anything more to?
So Jackie,
So Curtis, do you have it? All right, everybody. Well, 45-minute break. Go grab yourself something to eat if you haven't already, and we will start promptly at 7.
awesome.
All right. Thank you.